Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. So in today's episode, I want to address the question of why am I so bloated all the time? I actually find bloating is hands down one of the most common symptoms my clients deal with. And I definitely know it was part of my own struggle with IBS-D and colitis. In fact, when I think back to the earliest memories I have of having gut issues, I remember coming home from elementary school, like late elementary school, and several times a week having to lay down on the couch or on my bed and put a pillow under my stomach to try to relieve the pressure and discomfort I was feeling from the bloating. And typically for me, it was worse at the end of the day. So kind of the end of the school day, I'd walk home and be dealing with it to a certain extent and then have to lay down and put that pressure. 20, 30 minutes of pressure on my tummy really seemed to help. And I would get up and I'd go about my day. But back then I sort of normalized that as something just particular to me. And I think my parents did as well. However, now that I've come full circle and obviously grown into an adult, gotten a lot of training around gut health and gut symptoms, I can see looking back that those were signs early on of digestive dysfunction and also foreshadowing some of the gut issues I had later in my life. So just know that this is a very, very common thing a lot of people deal with, whether they're on the diarrhea or the constipation end of the spectrum or alternating between the two, or they might even be having fairly normal bowel movements or more so normal bowel movements, but still dealing with some degree of bloating and discomfort. And I've actually had a lot of my female clients tell me that it's so bad they feel like they look like they're 4 months pregnant, or that even other people have commented that they are expecting or asked the question, are you expecting? Which really can be an emotionally painful thing when you're walking around feeling it yourself, but then also noticing that other people are noticing it as well. It just makes it a deeper level of, painful issue from that perspective. There are also people, though, I've noticed, and this might be a little bit more true for my diarrhea-prone clients, that are having some degree of bloating, but because they're more on the end of the spectrum where they're going to the bathroom more often, there isn't as much this like visceral sense of gas buildup and actual like feeling as though the abdomen is getting distended and looking as physically bloated if they were to look at themselves in the mirror sideways. That's probably a little bit more relevant to the constipation prone folks that I work with. However, I would still argue that that buildup of gases and just excessive gas production is often very much a part of diarrhea prone gut issues as well, whether you've got an IBS-D diagnosis or you're in the IBD camp. I just find that this is a pretty common thing. And often when those folks are actually having bowel movements, they'll express that they feel there's a lot of gas, a lot of excessive gas that's getting expelled at that moment in time as well. So I've actually found that as I work with people and they get results and they see better gut function, they'll actually tell me that they didn't realize how bloated they were until they started to see improvement in their gut. And I know this was something I experienced as well. So it just goes to show that we can be dealing with symptoms for a very long time, and the brain sort of adjusts and we normalize those things, not recognizing that they actually are as much of a problem as they are. And I find that bloating, as ubiquitous as it is, and all of the clients I work with, can be something that gets normalized. And sometimes people even lose sight of the fact that it is a big part of the gut struggle that they're dealing with. So I want to kind of touch on some of the root causes of bloating, just the very specific things I see time and time again, whether it's looking at functional stool testing that I help clients run, or just in terms of how they present and the other subjective clues I use to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and help them. And one of the common underlying root cause factors I see time and time again below the surface level symptom of bloating is digestive weakness. And this almost always will manifest as bloating that shows up as getting worse and worse the more the day goes on, right? So majority of the people I work with will tell me that they feel bloated all the time. Yet if we dig a little deeper, they're actually able to notice that as the day goes on, typically it gets worse. And this was true for me too. And part of the reason why this tends to happen for people is that as they're eating their meals over the course of the day, that's more and more food going through the digestive system. To the extent that the body isn't able to properly digest this food, it becomes substrate to feed the bacteria that are often at play in fermenting these foods and creating those gases that lead to the bloating symptoms. So to the extent we can't break our food down properly, it will go into the intestines, not completely digested, and then that will tend to feed the bacteria living in our gut to basically have a party, ferment these foods, and then produce these gases in excess, which then lead to the physical distension symptoms that a lot of my clients experience, or the discomfort and the pressure that they feel where it's like they have to lay down, they have to use a heating pad, they might even have to put more comfortable pants on that have like a stretchy waistband. So when I say digestive dysfunction or digestive weakness, what am I talking about? So this is the spiel that I give to a lot of prospective clients when I do an initial consult with them, because I really feel it's important for them to get somewhat of a handle on the process of digestion, understand that for themselves, so that they can really start to think about root cause factors driving their gut symptoms. And so the spiel I give is that we've basically got these upper digestive organs that all have to work well and they have to work together to break our food down properly. And so, just in a nutshell, to walk you through that process of upper digestion, first and foremost, we have the stomach, which is the first big organ that comes into play after we chew and swallow our food. The stomach's job is really to produce a substance called hydrochloric acid, which chemically helps to break down the food we eat. It specifically targets protein, so this would be mostly our animal-based foods, to help chemically break that down. And then the stomach does actually have a churn motion too, where it's going to mechanically kind of churn the food around, get it broken down as it's working on it with acid. Now, in a healthy stomach, ideally, we do want to see that acid come down to like a pH of between 1 and 2, so pretty acidic. This really helps to kind of break it down, cleave minerals, especially from the foods we eat, but other vitamins as well. We get a lot of vitamin B12 just from the action of stomach acid breaking down foods that contain vitamin B12. So it's not uncommon in my population of folks I work with that if they've gotten blood work done, or sometimes, we'll elect to run some blood work together, and we see functionally low vitamin B12 levels, that makes me very suspicious of low stomach acid. If they've got other clues present, that might suggest that as well. And so stomach plays a very, very important role. It's kind of the first major organ in the process of digestion. Now, just to touch for a minute on, common microbial imbalances or just bad gut bugs I see that can impact stomach function, probably the number one thing I see across the board with a lot of clients I work with is some degree of Helicobacter pylori or H. pylori overgrowth. And I've touched on this in other podcast episodes, but I'll just kind of circle back and speak on this for a moment. Here, H. pylori is basically a bacteria that can take up residence in the gut, the stomach especially. Some degree of it being present is pretty common and normal across the population. But certainly, if we're seeing signs of GI distress, symptoms like low stomach acid, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, stomach discomfort, right? Like in the context of some degree of H. pylori, I would say showing up on a functional stool test, I would say that's indicating that we could have an overgrowth or an imbalance there that could be contributing to the lowering of stomach acid levels. And so one thing just to know about H. pylori is that it does thrive in a more alkaline stomach acid environment. So if we think about the pH scale, the lower the number, like 0 to 1 to 2, that's a more acidic environment. The higher the number, like a 7 or 8, is more alkaline. So in a healthy stomach, we do want to see that pH coming in at a lower number versus a higher number. in the population that's more susceptible to H. pylori overgrowth, we're often seeing the problem of too much alkalinity, not enough acidity. This provides the perfect environment for H. pylori to take up residence. And what can happen when it does overgrow is it will actually reduce the stomach's ability to produce its own healthy levels of acid. And therefore, it makes it hard to get the stomach down to an acidic enough level to break food down appropriately. And so sometimes part of the strategy of supporting good stomach function includes helping the client to eradicate some of this H. pylori overgrowth, clear that away so that we can actually start to support the stomach back to a healthy acid production level. So I just want to touch on that because sometimes it is the case that there's just not enough stomach acid getting produced for a number of reasons. Lifestyle stress is probably the biggest one I see driving acid levels down in most people, because when we're in a state of go, 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 fight or flight, as we call it, right? Like that's not the time for the stomach to be producing acid and breaking down food. That's the time to be supporting blood flow to the extremities so we can literally run and escape from a threat. And keep in mind, the brain doesn't know the difference between literal threats, physical threats to survival, like a bear chasing us, for example, versus a perceived mental stressor, which I would say is, the most common thing most people are dealing with today is those imagined threats that we feel because of all of the different responsibilities and expectations we have on us between work and relationships and hobbies and family and all of the things, right? So, just being in that mental state of feeling like we have a lot to do, it's hard to keep up. That really can take away from healthy digestion in the sense that it's driving this chronic stress response. So, that's first and foremost. The second thing is that as we age, naturally, all of our digestive fluids, stomach acid included, will tend to drop because our body is just undergoing the aging process. We're not as primed to produce these things as we were at a younger place in our lives. So there can be multiple reasons why stomach acid levels drop, of course, right? So part of the work I do with clients is to, again, do a deep dive on what is going on, using functional testing appropriately to get some data to really rule in, rule out certain things we might think might be going on, and then using that data to basically develop a plan that confirms what we believe is going on. So that's the stomach. Second in command is the pancreas, right? So we've got the stomach that kind of breaks down food via stomach acid. Next in line, we've got the organ of the pancreas, which plays a role in digestion as well as sugar handling. It's actually got both an exocrine and endocrine role to it. Now, when it comes to digestion, the role of the pancreas is to produce a digestive fluid called enzymes. And so enzymes are actually more alkaline in nature. Part of the beauty of enzymes is that when that acidic content is getting, dumped from the stomach into the beginning of the small intestine also, by the way, produces its own enzymes as well. It'll immediately get worked on by these enzymes to help bring that acidic pH of the stomach contents down to more of a neutral level. So this food is more of that neutral pH as it makes its way through the small intestine. However, similar to the stomach, the pancreas too can also drop in its ability to produce pancreatic enzymes. And so in a more severe type of condition, we would call this pancreatic insufficiency. And so this is, again, a condition that can be diagnosed and treated by a lot of GI doctors, but certainly through specialized stool testing, we can see clues that would point us to think that this might be at play. And of course, if we're not producing enough acid, we're not producing enough enzymes, again, we're setting the stage for not having that food getting broken down properly and then making it into the intestines and becoming more of a fuel source for bacterial growth and overgrowth. So with enzymes, mostly what they are targeting, working on, are more of the carbohydrates. So your fruits, your vegetables, your starches, your grains. And again, all of these digestive fluids are very important together. I do tend to see that if we see cases of stomach acid dropping off, it's not uncommon to also see pancreatic enzyme production starting to drop off as well. It's kind of like these organs all sense into one another and work together via the brain. There's a lot of feedback loops that happen in the process of digestion, whereby if the brain senses the stomach isn't able to produce acid to full capacity, often that pancreas will start to get a little bit lazy in its ability to produce enzymes as well. And it does make sense in that the law of energy conservation, right? Like if the body as a whole is just sensing that it doesn't need to be producing as many digestive fluids to break food down, it's not often going to drop at just the level of one organ. We're going to see kind of the drop off across the board. And or if there just isn't enough energy available to digest food properly, produce these digestive fluids, we're not going to see usually just one organ drop off. Typically, it's a drop off across the board. So again, these are clues that I look for in specialized stool testing to try to get an understanding of, are we seeing just one upper GI organ that's weak in its function, or are we actually starting to see multiple organs weak in its function? So the pancreas, again, very, very important along with the stomach for breaking down food appropriately. Now, the last couple of organs that play a role in breaking down food are the liver and the gallbladder in tandem. And now, just to touch on real quick, I do talk with a lot of people who have had a history of gallstones specifically, and because of that, have had their gallbladders removed. You don't technically need to have the gallbladder there to have a working liver with the ability to produce digestive fluid called bile, which works on fat specifically. However, having that gallbladder removed can inhibit the ability of the liver to produce bile and release it appropriately during digestion to get good breakdown of fats. And I'll describe that in just a second. But essentially, this substance called bile, it's a different type of digestive fluid in that it targets fats. It basically helps to break down these larger fat molecules into smaller molecules called essential fatty acids, similar to the way your dishwashing detergent will cut grease on dishes, right? Like it works in a very similar manner. And, again, common problem I see is that at the level of the liver, sometimes it's just not producing enough bile to actually break down food appropriately, or there could be problems with the quality of bile where it's either sludgy or just not able to kind of do its job efficiently. And so, again, in extreme cases, we can actually see it get solidified and turn into stones that actually create inflammation in the gallbladder, which can lead to gallbladder attacks, right? And then in extreme cases, having the gallbladder removed. And so the essence, though, of that entire issue does go back to just bile quality. And then we have to sort of look deeper at, well, what caused bile quality to get so bad in the first place? Like, what were those factors leading to that? And I don't want to do a deep dive on that in today's episode. There are a lot of things that can cause bile quality to go downhill. However, that is the genesis of why often people will end up with gallstones, and then that could eventually lead to, getting their gallbladder removed. So just understand that if there are issues with bile quality, either proper amounts of it or quality of it, it will make it harder then to break down fats in the foods we eat. And so fats are present in fatty cuts of animal meat. They're present in the cooking oils and fats we use. They're present in nut and seeds, right? So most of the time we're eating, we're going to be having at least one or more foods that have a good amount of fat. And just like protein and carbohydrate, if our fat isn't getting broken down appropriately, that will lead to, undigested food, again, setting the stage for bacterial overgrowth. Fats, especially if they're not getting broken down, can often lead to a lot of bloating, discomfort, sometimes even foul smelling gas, unusual things in terms of bowel movements where we might be seeing like a greasy film or floating stools, excessively foul smelling stools. All of that can be signs of undigested fat going through the intestines, which again can be inflammatory because it's meant to be broken down and properly absorbed by the gut. So all of these organs play a role, right? And if we see one or more of them starting to go offline, that can absolutely set the stage for bloating. And it really doesn't matter if it's stomach acid, enzymes, or bile, all of them equally, if they go low or are insufficient or of poor quality, can set that stage for bloating as the first symptom to show up in that chain. Because again, we're seeing this undigested food making it into the intestines, and typically what will happen is it will cause bacteria to feed off of it, and then the bacterial byproducts will create a lot of gas that leads to the bloating. So I would say hands down, I would go so far as to say in almost every case of bloating, there is some degree of upper digestive weakness, and we just have to sort of pinpoint which organ or organs are involved in that and try to come up with a plan to restore function properly. Another issue that kind of hinges on upper GI dysfunction, right, like digestive weakness, is the condition of small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Now, this is something that, again, a lot of clients come to me diagnosed by a GI doc with, and this can be diagnosed. The gold standard of test to diagnosis is the lactulose breath test. It measures hydrogen and methane gas output after, within certain time intervals after drinking a lactulose containing solution, which is a type of sugar that does not get broken down fully by the body, and so it can feed bacteria. So what's happening is we're measuring what amount of bacteria is present, or we're getting kind of an indirect read on, based on levels of gases that are breathed out during this test, we can make a safe assumption of how much bacteria is actually overgrowing in the gut, leading to this amount of gas production. And so again, key point for this particular condition is that these bacteria live in the small intestine. And so ideally, when we're looking at where the healthy bacteria in the gut should predominantly reside, predominantly they should be in the large intestine. That is the intestine that is home to the majority of our good gut bugs. It's, called our microbiome. That's where we want to see our fibers fermented. It's an area where a lot of vitamins can get produced if we've got a good amount of gut bugs living there. There's good balance. That is kind of the ideal scenario. Now, with the small intestine, what we're seeing in the condition of SIBO is that a lot of these good gut bugs that should normally be housed in the large intestine are actually residing in the small intestine instead. And so the problem that presents is not only that they're going to feed off of these food particles that are coming down from, the upper GI, not fully digested, having a party as this food is coming through because they can now eat and feed and proliferate, right, which just perpetuates this problem of overgrowth. But as they're doing that, often what's happening is these bacteria are also stealing nutrients from the body, because the small intestine is the organ of nutrient absorption. That's how our body actually gets food from the intestines to the cells of the body. And so if a lot of that is going to the bacteria for fuel and not getting captured by our own villi, which are the hair-like projections that are in the small intestine that kind of grab these food particles and bring them into the bloodstream, if food is getting stealed away from the body itself, this is not only going to lead to a lot of bloating and discomfort, but also to a lot of just lack of nutrition and just malabsorption issues. So, with conditions like SIBO, it's not uncommon to see secondarily a lot of low energy or chronic fatigue, sometimes even brain fog happening, blood sugar imbalances, or the inability to go 3 to 4 hours meal to meal, because to the extent we're not capturing all of that nutrition, it's causing blood sugar levels to drop, within an hour, 2 hours. And then that person's often feeling hungry again and needing to eat. And so every time this process of eating more and more frequently happens, food isn't getting broken down. That just feeds the bacteria overgrowing in the small intestine, creates more bloating, more symptoms, and just perpetuates this whole problem. So that's another common issue that can show up in the context of bloating and dry bloating. And I often see the two hand in hand, to be honest. Like, I often do see a picture of some degree of digestive weakness alongside some degree of small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or a picture of that if we were to run a functional stool test. Now, the third thing that can cause bloating are intestinal parasites. And there's all kinds of them that can show up on, functional stool testing. But a lot of just the unwanted side effects or negative side effects of these bugs are things like bloating and nutrient malabsorption, sometimes constipation, sometimes diarrhea. They literally impact our ability to have solid digestion and will show up and manifest as overt digestive symptoms. There are some that don't, but by and large, I do find that a lot of parasites will impact digestive symptoms. If they're present, there's almost always going to be one or more digestive symptoms associated with it. And again, more so true in a person who has other things in combination, like low stomach acid, low pancreatic enzyme output, right? And just know too that all of these factors kind of relate. So, one thing just to circle back and touch on when it comes to stomach acid is it is also meant as our first line of defense against things like contamination from bacteria and parasites, right? Like robust stomach acid production should be knocking down these bugs before they actually make it into our systems and make us sick. And so part of the weak foundational factor that can set the stage for things like parasites in the gut is not having enough stomach acid, which is why, in my opinion, if there's any degree of stomach weakness or dysfunction, we almost always have to start there to get the whole GI system working properly again and prevent future issues like parasite reinfection, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth recurrence from happening. If we don't get the stomach doing its job properly, it's going to make it very hard to actually prevent these issues from coming back in the future. So just understand that. And then the fourth thing would be food sensitivities and or inflammatory foods in the diet. And again, I'm not a huge proponent of running food sensitivity testing on every single client. There is a time and place for it. However, I often see food sensitivities as a secondary issue to things like poor digestion, parasites present, bad bacterial overgrowth, right? Like bad bacterial imbalances. And so these things will often actually set the stage for an inflamed gut and make it hard for the digestive system as a whole to handle eating a variety of foods. And then you add to that certain foods, just the way that they're designed, have more what we call antigenic components to them, making them either harder to digest and or just a little bit more likely to be stimulatory to the immune system. And so depending on a person's diet, if they're eating a lot more of those types of foods in combination with these other GI weaknesses, that can really just exacerbate the problem of bloating. And now we can have this added element of immune activation happening because the person's developed these sensitivities to a lot of the foods they're eating. And so again, I'm not going to do a deep dive on the whole issue of food sensitivities. I did record a podcast episode earlier on this entire topic, and I will link it below in the show notes if this is something that interests you. I do find it very important to try to work with this element and address it, and I absolutely do that with all of the clients I work with, but I don't always take a testing-based approach to it because I really want to be able to identify and address the deeper issues like the bad gut bugs or the digestive weakness that are setting the stage for the food sensitivities. And so I believe that using other tests to do that is a much better way of using our testing budget to get the data we need. And then we can work with food sensitivities from more of a nutrition therapeutic diet standpoint, which I find often works just as well, if not better, for the majority of people. So again, getting the foods right for the person at the time they're at, if they've got a really compromised gut, we absolutely do have to try to address and remove as many of the food triggers as possible. However, really getting deeper and looking at, well, what are the other problems and stressors causing some of this, inflammation in the gut that's leading to these food triggers in the first place? That really is the key question that has to be answered as part of this process. Your struggles with bloating, constipation, and diarrhea keeping you home on Friday, Saturday nights, clicking through Netflix because you're dealing with stomach cramping? Or simply need to have a bathroom nearby? Have you stopped being active and joining your friends at the gym because it flares your symptoms and wipes you out for the rest of the day? How about avoiding social gatherings involving food because of extreme anxiety over food reactions or sudden bathroom runs in public? Or because you are too embarrassed to explain your limited diet to others? The isolation, loneliness, and depression that comes with an IBS or IBD struggle is real and often worse than the physical symptoms. I'm here to tell you that you deserve better than just living with this reality and suffering alone. From a person who has lived this nightmare and come out the other end and who has helped many others do the same, there is hope and you are worth the investment. Click the link below to schedule your free 15-minute gut check call. Now, there are other secondary imbalances that can show up in the body outside of the gut that can very much impact gut function and also lead to things like bloating. And as I go through this list, just understand that this is a bit of a chicken and egg as well, because to the extent we have a compromised gut, weak digestion, bad gut bugs in the gut, all of this can then impact other organs and other systems of the body. And so, sometimes when a client comes to me, it's hard to know at the point in time we meet what came first in the order of things breaking down, right? Like, was it the gut that broke down first and then that led to low thyroid function? We don't always know. We don't always know the answer to that question. However, again, this is the beauty of using root cause testing. We can actually get some good data, at least get a very good understanding of where we're at the snapshot in time, and then try to pull all the threads that make sense to try to strengthen the body back to optimal function, whether that looks like helping to clear out some bad gut bugs, supporting digestion, removing toxins, supporting other organs of the body like the thyroid. All of that is possible, and we can do it in a very strategic and conscious way, right? So these other secondary imbalances that can impact things like bloating are things like low thyroid. And I did an entire episode on thyroid with my colleague Abby Vallejo, and I will again link that episode in the show notes below because it's an excellent deep dive on just thyroid, why it's so important, and how it can impact things like the gut as well as sex hormones. But just in a nutshell, thyroid, right? Typically, when we're seeing thyroid issues, we're seeing thyroid go low. It can actually go high and be hyperactive in the context of autoimmune disease. That can look like diagnoses like Graves, right? But typically we're seeing it go low. And when thyroid goes low, that means basically everything in the body gets down regulated. We see a more slowed down metabolic state, including digestion, right? Like digestion is not going to be working in its full optimal capacity if thyroid is not working at its full optimal capacity. So back to thinking about, stomach acid production, enzyme production, bile, all of that is going to be down regulated if the metabolism is down regulated, including things like gut motility and moving food through the intestines, right? So if we're not digesting our food because we don't have gas in the tank metabolically, and we can't actually move it through the intestines at an optimal rate from a motility standpoint, because we've got low thyroid function, of course, this will also set the stage for bloating because we're not breaking down our food. And it's, again, moving through the system at a slow enough rate that it's causing inflammation and, again, yielding a higher potential for bacterial fermentation. So there is that component as well. Toxin exposure is another one. And whether we're talking toxic mold exposure, biotoxin illness, like tick-borne illnesses, right? Chemical toxins, heavy metals, like the whole nine, all of these things can, first of all, take up a residence or lodge in the digestive organs and or the gut and or the sinuses, right? All these hollow spaces that can be easy places for these things to hide. They can, and again, the GI system itself is a hollow tube, right? So if we think about even just like, the sinus cavities and the gut, there's a lot of potential for things to kind of move back and forth. So if these things are hanging out in the gut, absolutely, they're going to be provoking the immune system. They're going to be inflammatory. They're going to be causing more imbalances just because of the fact that the body's aware that these stressors are present. And so it's not uncommon if someone's carrying an unusually high toxic burden to have bloating because, again, the immune system is going to be stimulated. Their gut is going to be more inflamed. We could even argue things like Lyme and mold, especially, will really shut down and inhibit energy production in the cells, but just kind of systemically as well. And they can also be contributing factors to things like digestive weakness because now the body's energy is kind of getting consumed by these toxins that are disrupting how things work to their own advantage so they can thrive in the body. And so again, very, very common to see weak digestion in the context of toxic mold exposure as well as tick-borne illness. And so this, again, could be another just secondary component driving things like bloating. And then another one, and again, this does go back somewhat to the weak digestive component we spoke of initially, but just nutrient deficiencies that could impact cellular function, right? So we've got all these really important nutrient and mineral cofactors that help at the smallest level, at the cellular level, to make the engine of our body work. And to the extent that we aren't breaking our food down well, this is how we get these nutrients we need, right? Like they're in whole foods that we eat. If we aren't eating enough whole foods or we're not digesting them very well, that over time can lead to very specific nutrient deficiencies that can make it hard then to run the engine of the body. And again, this becomes a chicken and egg problem because once we have weak digestion happening, this is going to more likely set the stage for nutrient deficiencies. But at the same time, once we have nutrient deficiencies that are set, in place, it can be hard to restore digestion because some of these cofactors that help support cellular function also help to support building these digestive fluids we need. For example, things like zinc help to support healthy stomach acid production. So to the extent we become deficient in zinc, it makes it harder for the body to restore its own acid production. Zinc is also a really important cofactor for a lot of other processes in the body and for supporting good immune function. So therefore, it can also lead secondarily to trouble clearing infections or recovering from illness, all those different things. So again, this can be supported and reversed through good diet change, as well as correcting some of these nutrient deficiencies as we're working on restoring good digestive function and clearing any bad gut bugs. But I just want to mention it because this is kind of one of those that is more of a deficiency driven component that can lead to bloating, right? And so as I mentioned, if we're not getting enough of these nutrient cofactors to support good digestion, good motility, good cellular function, good thyroid function, we're going to often see bloating as a byproduct because everything is just running on sort of a slowed down, less gas in the tank type of scenario. So the fix for all of these things, I just want to talk a little bit about that, or essentially how I would approach trying to get the data I need to help a client get to the bottom of their bloating and fix this hopefully for the long haul. So I want to mention just two very specific tools that I work with that are just critical to this. And the first one is doing a deep food journal analysis. So all of my clients, I ask them to write down everything they eat and drink for at least 3 days. I'll have them do this several times throughout the 3 months we work together because I really can't help them totally troubleshoot bloating if I have no clue what they're eating. And this is also coming from the reality that the foods we eat are so critical to how digestion works. And I want to be able to identify, are they consuming foods that are inflammatory? Are they consuming foods that, are not nutrient dense or contain different components that I find time and time again tend to provoke gut symptoms for my clients? But are they eating foods that are denatured and processed? What does the majority of their diet look like? Other simple things like, are they hydrating properly? Are they drinking enough water? Do I see that they're eating foods that are full of vitamins and minerals or not? These are very critical pieces of information that I like to gather as part of just the whole person view I look at with my clients to help them troubleshoot how to help them fix the problem of chronic bloating. And so we definitely always are going to attack this from a food journal and a nutritional change perspective. And that's where having a plan to help them map out those changes step by step over time really helps lay that foundation for how are we going to get you to a place where you can maintain these results and hopefully kick the bloating problem and it won't be an issue you ever have to deal with again. And so that's part of the lifestyle prevention plan in my 3-month program. Now, the other part, which is part of the root cause test method that I work with as part of my 3-month program, is running a really good functional stool test. And this is one of the root cause tests that I do often recommend to clients, especially my clients struggling with gut issues, because I find it so important to get data on what is really going on beneath the surface. We can guess about it all day long, but I'm telling you, I've seen it time and time again. 2 different clients present with the exact same types of symptoms, and then I look at them from a functional stool testing perspective, and the root cause things, the data I'm seeing are wildly different. And this is the real catch, right? Like you can have diarrhea in 2 different people, but the things causing that diarrhea could be
so many different things, right? Like so many different factors could be happening to lead to that symptom result. And what I want to get clear on is, well, what are the actual factors that we can measure that give me good clarity that, okay, this is why you're having this diarrhea problem. Let's go ahead now and put a plan in place because we've got data to back it to actually address that. That's where I want to get in terms of my ability to really confidently go after and help with these issues. And bloating, same thing. I want to be able to identify as many potential imbalances or opportunities to help this client optimize their digestion, clear bad gut bugs, whatever the case may be, as I can. And I just find that running a good functional stool test is critical to that. So this is my whole spiel on bloating. I hope this helps just give you a deeper level of understanding and insight into how functional health, functional medicine, nutrition looks at trying to work on and troubleshoot problems like chronic bloating. And, as you're on the path of trying to get to the bottom of your health issues, including bloating, hopefully this will give you some deeper insight and things to think about in terms of where do I want to go to try to resolve this. And hopefully some hope too that it is possible to actually get a plan in place and improve something like this. In fact, completely eradicate a symptom like this if you get to the actual root cause factors driving things like bloating and you have a sustainable plan to prevent it from coming back. I mean, that's gold. That is gold for a lot of my clients. And, although this is such a common problem, I do find it to be one of the most emotionally painful problems simply because they don't feel good in their bodies. It impacts their ability to wear certain clothes. They often are experiencing a lot of discomfort and working with heating pads or laying down to rest because they don't feel good, right? Like this is a very, very common struggle, and or they feel anxious and afraid to go out and even partake in social events and going out with friends and family because of the food fear. Which foods am I going to eat that's going to now keep me on a heating pad for the next 24 hours because I'm so bloated? So again, hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to connecting with you next time.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.